The encounter. Jack's spacecraft plummeted through the dense violet clouds of an uncharted planet. The cockpit shook violently, alarms blaring as warning lights blinked red. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he gripped the controls, desperately trying to stabilize his descent. It was no use. The ship was losing altitude, fast. The ground came rushing up too quickly for comfort. Jack braced himself as the craft crashed into the rocky surface, the impact throwing him forward in his seat. After several tense moments, the ship stilled. Silence followed, broken only by the faint hiss of steam escaping damaged pipes. Jack groaned, unfastening his harness. His hands trembled as he assessed the situation. The ship was a wreck. Sparks flew from shattered panels, and the engine emitted a low, defeated hum. The communicator was dead. He was stranded. "Great," Jack muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Just my luck." Grabbing his emergency gear, he stepped out of the ship. The air was breathable but heavy, as if the atmosphere itself were pressing down on him. The landscape stretched endlessly, a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and a dark, glassy terrain that reflected the eerie, twin suns hanging low in the lavender sky. He adjusted his wrist scanner, hoping to find signs of life or resources. The device beeped erratically, overwhelmed by the planet's strange energy readings. Jack frowned. It wasn't like any world he'd seen before, and he'd seen plenty. As he ventured further from the wreck, a chilling sensation crept up his spine. He had the distinct feeling of being watched, though the landscape appeared empty. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the rocky ground. "Hello," Jack called out, his voice echoing faintly. He didn't expect a response, and yet something about this place made him uneasy. Minutes turned into hours as he wandered, his nerves fraying with every passing moment. Just when he considered turning back, he saw her. She stood atop a ridge, silhouetted against the blazing suns. At first glance, she looked human. A slender figure draped in flowing, silver robes that shimmered like liquid metal. Her hair, a cascade of white, seemed to glow faintly, as though it captured the light around her. But it was her eyes that stopped Jack in his tracks. They weren't human. They gleamed with an otherworldly luminescence, piercing and hypnotic. Jack's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he hesitated. She made no move toward him, simply watching from her perch. The wind whipped around her, yet she stood unnaturally still. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice firm despite the knot forming in his stomach. "What is this place?" The woman tilted her head, a small, almost amused smile playing on her lips. When she spoke, her voice was calm, melodic, and most unsettling, perfectly fluent in English. "You don't belong here." Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. "I didn't have much of a choice. My ship crashed." Her expression didn't change. "And yet you came. That's what matters." "What are you talking about?" Jack asked, his frustration growing. "Look, I just need to fix my ship and get out of here. Can you help or not?" The woman stepped closer, her movements unnervingly smooth. Despite the distance between them, it felt as though she closed the gap in an instant. Jack instinctively stepped back, his heart pounding. "You cannot leave," she said simply. Jack stared at her, incredulous. "What do you mean I can't leave?" "I'm not staying here." Her glowing eyes locked onto his. For a moment, he felt as though she was peering straight into his soul, unearthing secrets even he didn't know he had. Her expression softened, but her tone remained resolute. "If you leave, it will awaken." Jack blinked. "Awaken what? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she extended a hand, her palm facing upward. A faint, swirling light appeared above it, forming shapes, symbols, and images Jack couldn't comprehend. They seemed to tell a story, one he didn't have the context to understand. "Listen," Jack said, his voice firm but less confident now. "I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but I'm not staying here. If you won't help, I'll find a way out myself." The woman's smile faded. For the first time, she looked sad. You still don't understand, do you? You're here for a reason, Jack. Hearing his name made his blood run cold. He hadn't told her. He hadn't told anyone. There was no one else here. How do you know my name? He demanded, his voice rising. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began walking away, her figure fading into the shimmering heat of the horizon. Jack stood frozen, his mind racing with questions. Hey, wait. He called after her, but she didn't stop. When he finally gathered the courage to follow, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the unsettling stillness of the alien landscape. Jack looked around, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. The scanner on his wrist beeped erratically again, pulling his attention. A new signal had appeared on the display, an energy source unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was coming from the direction the woman had gone. With no other options, Jack tightened the straps on his gear and set off. He didn't know who or what she was, but one thing was certain. This planet wasn't going to let him leave. Not yet. The truth about her, Jack followed the faint signal on his wrist scanner, his boots crunching against the alien terrain. The glowing energy source pulsed faintly on the display, growing stronger with each step he took. The atmosphere felt heavier now, as though the planet itself was aware of his presence. Every sound, the hiss of the wind, the shifting of distant rocks, set his nerves on edge. He replayed the encounter with the woman in his mind, her haunting eyes, the strange symbols, the way she'd said his name without asking. None of it made sense. Who was she? And what did she mean by, "If you leave, it will awaken"? The terrain shifted as he walked, the sharp rocks giving way to smooth, glass-like ground that reflected the light of the twin suns. It felt unnervingly alive, as if it were breathing beneath his feet. Jack's pace slowed. The signal on his scanner was now so strong that the device vibrated in his hand. He was close. Ahead, he saw it, a structure carved into the side of a jagged mountain. It was massive, its entrance flanked by two towering obelisks covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer and shift when viewed from different angles. The air around the entrance buzzed faintly, as though charged with static electricity. Jack hesitated. He didn't trust this place, or the woman, but he had no choice. He needed answers. As he approached the entrance, a voice cut through the silence, stopping him in his tracks. "You shouldn't be here." Jack spun around, his heart hammering. She was there, standing just a few feet away, as if she'd materialized from the air itself. Her silver robes billowed gently, though there was no wind, and her glowing eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You again," Jack said, his voice laced with frustration. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him as though he were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Finally, she spoke. "You are persistent. Most would have turned back by now." Jack's jaw tightened. "Well, I'm not most. Who are you? What is this place? And why do you keep saying I can't leave?" The woman stepped closer, her movements impossibly smooth, like a ripple in water. "My name is Area. This place is my home. And you can't leave because your presence here has already set events in motion. To leave now would doom not only yourself but countless others." Jack's brow furrowed. "What does that even mean? What events? Stop talking in riddles and give me a straight answer." Area's expression softened, but there was a weight in her gaze, as though she carried the burden of millennia. "This planet is not what it seems. It is alive, sentient, and it has been sleeping for eons. But your arrival, it stirred something within it." Jack's stomach churned. "You're telling me the planet is alive? Like some kind of organism?" Area nodded. "Not just an organism, a guardian. It was created to protect something ancient and powerful. But that power is also dangerous. If the planet fully awakens, it will seek to fulfill its purpose, no matter the cost." Jack shook his head, his skepticism growing. This is insane. You expect me to believe all this? Why should I trust you? Aria's glowing eyes narrowed. Because I know you, Jack. More than you know yourself. I know why you left Earth, why you chose to wander the stars instead of facing your past. And I know that deep down, you want to do the right thing, even if it terrifies you. Jack's breath caught in his throat. She was right. About everything. But how could she know? He clenched his fists, trying to push down the rising panic. You're still not answering my question, he said, his voice trembling with equal parts anger and fear. Why me? Why now? Aria's gaze didn't waver. Because you're human. And humanity is connected to this place in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Long ago, your ancestors stood where you stand now. They made a choice that shaped the fate of their civilization. Now that choice has come full circle. You are here because you must decide again. Jack took a step back, his mind racing. Decide what? What choice? Before Aria could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural rumble echoed from deep within the mountain. Jack stumbled, barely keeping his balance as cracks spread across the glassy surface, glowing with a faint blue light. It's waking up, Aria said, her voice urgent. We're out of time. Jack's instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay. What do I need to do? Aria held out her hand. Come with me. There's something you need to see. For a moment, Jack hesitated, every fiber of his being telling him this was a terrible idea. But there was something in Aria's eyes, something unshakable. Trust, desperation. He couldn't tell. Reluctantly, he took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, the world around him changed. The jagged mountain and cracked ground vanished, replaced by a vast, swirling expanse of stars and galaxies. Jack felt weightless, as though he were floating in the void of space. Beside him, Aria stood, her presence somehow grounding him. This is the truth, she said, her voice echoing in the infinite expanse. Your people were once part of something far greater. But they forgot. They abandoned their place in the stars. And now, the universe is calling them back. Before Jack could respond, the vision shifted. He saw Earth, but it wasn't the Earth he knew. Towering cities of light stretched into the sky, and strange, elegant ships filled the heavens. Then, the image darkened, replaced by chaos, fire, destruction, and a shadowy figure consuming everything in its path. What is that? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The reason you cannot leave, Aria said, her tone heavy with sorrow. If you leave, it will find you. And if it finds you, it will find Earth. The vision ended abruptly, and Jack found himself back on the glassy surface of the alien planet. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Aria knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. Now you understand. Jack looked up at her, his face pale. He didn't have the words to respond. All he knew was that leaving was no longer an option. The forbidden history. Jack sat in the dim light of the alien cavern, his mind spinning with everything Aria had told him. He still didn't trust her, but after what he had seen, what she had shown him, he couldn't walk away, not yet. The cavern walls shimmered faintly, like they were alive, pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat too deep to hear. Strange symbols etched into the surface seemed to shift when he looked at them, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. Aria stood nearby, her silver robes flowing as though moved by an unseen wind. She was silent, watching him with those glowing eyes, waiting for his questions. Jack finally broke the silence. You said humans were here before, he began, his voice echoing softly. That we were part of something bigger. What did you mean by that? Aria approached slowly, her movements graceful but heavy with purpose. Your ancestors, she said, her voice calm but laced with sorrow, were not born on Earth. Jack froze, his breath catching. What? They were part of a coalition, a vast alliance of civilizations that spanned the stars, Area continued. They thrived, exploring the universe, building wonders beyond imagination. But that was a long time ago, before Earth became isolated. Jack's mind reeled. Are you saying humans are aliens? In a way, Area said, kneeling to trace one of the glowing carvings on the cavern wall. The symbols lit up under her touch, forming an intricate pattern that spread across the surface like veins of light. Your people were once like me, travelers among the stars. But something happened, something that changed everything. Jack leaned forward, his curiosity overpowering his skepticism. What happened? Area's expression darkened. A great war. One that tore the Alliance apart. Your ancestors fought valiantly, but the cost was unimaginable. Entire worlds were lost, including the heart of the Alliance, their homeworld. She gestured to the walls, where the symbols shifted again, forming images. Jack saw a fleet of elegant starships battling shadowy, monstrous forms. Explosions lit up the void of space, and the destruction was overwhelming. To protect what little remained, Area said, your ancestors made a desperate choice. They sealed away the remnants of their knowledge, their technology, and fled to a small, distant world, Earth. They erased their past to ensure their survival, leaving behind only fragments of who they were. Jack stared at the glowing images, a deep unease settling over him. So, humanity has been living a lie. We've been stranded on Earth this whole time, cut off from everything. Area nodded. Yes, but it wasn't just a lie. It was a safeguard. The entity that destroyed the Alliance was never truly defeated. It was only contained. And this planet, my planet, was chosen to be its prison. Jack's stomach dropped. The thing you said would awaken if I left. That's what you're talking about, isn't it? Yes, Area said softly. Your crash disturbed its slumber. If you leave, it will escape, and its hunger for destruction will consume everything, starting with Earth. Jack ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. Why me? Why now? Out of all the places I could have crashed, why here? Area's gaze softened. That is the question, isn't it? Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps this planet, this guardian, called you here, sensing your connection to the past. Jack let out a bitter laugh. Fate. Connection. Lady, I'm just a pilot trying to survive. I didn't sign up to save the galaxy. Area's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Sometimes, the ones who feel least prepared are the ones who are most needed. Jack shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. You say I can't leave, but you haven't told me how to stop this thing from waking up. Area stood and gestured for him to follow. Then it's time you saw the truth for yourself. She led him deeper into the cavern, the air growing colder with every step. The walls glowed brighter, the symbols becoming more intricate, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with energy. At the end of the tunnel, they emerged into a massive chamber. Jack's jaw dropped. In the center of the chamber stood a colossal structure, an ancient machine, humming faintly with power. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, both beautiful and terrifying. Its surface was covered in the same glowing symbols, and it pulsed like a living thing. What is that? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Area approached the machine, her expression reverent. This is the seal. It's what keeps the entity contained, but its power is waning. That's why your arrival has triggered its awakening. Jack stepped closer, the sheer scale of the machine making him feel small. And you've been here, guarding this thing. For how long? Longer than you can imagine, Area said, her voice tinged with weariness. I was chosen to remain here, immortal, to ensure the seal stayed intact. But I cannot do it alone anymore. That's why you're here. Jack frowned. What do you mean? What can I do that you can't? Area turned to face him, her glowing eyes piercing. The seal was built by your ancestors. Only someone of their lineage can restore its strength. You are the key, Jack. He staggered back, shaking his head. No, no way. I'm just a guy trying to survive. I can't. I'm not some hero. Arya stepped closer, her expression gentle but firm. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to choose. Stay and fight for your people's future, or leave and watch everything they built fall to ruin. Jack stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical force. He didn't want this. He didn't ask for any of it. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The fate of more than just himself was at stake. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. All right, what do I have to do? Arya smiled, a flicker of hope lighting her face. Come, there is much to prepare. As they turned back toward the machine, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just been irrevocably changed. Whether he liked it or not, he was part of something far greater than himself. And there was no turning back. The planet's secret. Jack stood in the shadow of the colossal machine. The seal. Its energy pulsed steadily, illuminating the massive cavern with an otherworldly glow. The sheer scale of the device was overwhelming. It towered above him, humming with an ancient power that felt both alien and oddly familiar. How do I fix something I don't even understand? Jack asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Arya was examining the symbols on the seal's surface, her glowing eyes narrowing in concentration. You don't need to understand it, she replied without looking at him. You only need to follow its guidance. Jack frowned. Guidance? It's a machine, not a tour guide. Arya turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. This machine was built by your ancestors, Jack. It responds to their lineage. You may not feel it yet, but it knows you. It will guide you, if you let it. Jack opened his mouth to argue but stopped. He realized he was exhausted, not just physically but mentally. He'd spent his life running. From responsibilities, from connections, from himself. Now he was being told that his very bloodline held the key to stopping some ancient threat. It was too much. He sighed and gestured to the machine. Fine. Let's say I believe you. How do we start? Arya motioned for him to follow her. She led him to the base of the seal, where a circular platform hummed with energy. Strange symbols floated in the air above it, rearranging themselves in intricate patterns. This is the interface, Arya explained. It will test your connection to the seal. Step onto it. Jack hesitated, staring at the glowing platform. Test? What kind of test? The seal needs to know if you are worthy, she said simply. It will delve into your memories, your fears, your desires. If you resist, it will reject you. If it rejects you, we're out of options. Jack felt a cold sweat forming on his brow. Delve into my memories. Great. That sounds invasive. Arya raised an eyebrow. Would you rather take the risk or watch your world burn? Jack groaned but stepped onto the platform. The moment his foot touched it, a wave of energy surged through him. His vision blurred, and he felt weightless, like he was floating in a void. Then everything went dark. When Jack opened his eyes, he wasn't in the cavern anymore. He was standing in the middle of a lush green forest. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Birds chirped in the distance. For a moment, he thought he was back on Earth. But something felt off. The forest was too perfect, too still, as if it were frozen in time. Where am I? Jack muttered, turning in a slow circle. This is your mind, came Arya's voice, though she was nowhere to be seen. The interface is accessing your memories and emotions. What you see here reflects who you are. Jack looked around, his confusion deepening. Why a forest? You tell me. Arya's voice replied. What does this place mean to you? Jack thought for a moment. Then it hit him. The forest reminded him of the woods near his childhood home. He used to explore them for hours, pretending to be a space adventurer. It was a place where he felt safe, free. Before he could respond, the forest shifted. The trees darkened, their leaves withering and falling to the ground. The sunlight vanished, replaced by an ominous red glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A low, guttural growl echoed through the air. "What's happening?" Jack called out, his voice trembling. "The interface is testing you," Aria's voice said. "It's showing you your fears. You must face them." Jack turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a younger version of himself. But this version looked angry, disheveled, and haunted. "You don't belong here," the figure snarled, its voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can save anyone. You couldn't even save yourself." Jack froze, his heart pounding. The figure's words cut deep, dredging up memories he'd tried to bury, failures, regrets, moments when he'd let others down. "I know what you are," the figure continued, stepping closer. "You're a coward. Always running, always hiding. What makes you think you're any different now?" Jack clenched his fists, his breath coming in short gasps. The figure's words felt like knives, but something inside him refused to back down. "I may not have all the answers," Jack said, his voice shaky but firm. "But I'm here now. I'm not running anymore." The figure sneered but didn't respond. Instead, it dissolved into a swirl of light that was absorbed by the seal's symbols. The red glow faded, replaced by a calming blue light. Jack's eyes snapped open, and he was back in the cavern. The platform beneath his feet pulsed with a steady rhythm, and the symbols on the seal were glowing brighter than before. "You did it," Aria said, her voice filled with relief. Jack stepped off the platform, his legs shaky. "What just happened?" "You proved your connection to the seal," Aria explained. "It recognizes you now. It will allow you to restore its power." Jack looked up at the massive machine, its glow filling the chamber with a serene light. For the first time since he'd crash-landed on this planet, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "What's next?" Aria smiled faintly. "Now we prepare. The hardest part is yet to come." Jack didn't know what she meant, but he could feel the weight of the task ahead. Whatever came next, he wasn't sure he was ready, but he was determined to see it through. Betrayal and trust. The silence in the cavern was almost suffocating. The air, thick with tension, hummed with energy, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Jack stood before the seal, his mind still reeling from the vision of his younger self, the version that had accused him of cowardice and weakness. The experience felt too real, too painful. He had spent so many years running from the mistakes he'd made. But now, standing in the heart of this alien world, those same mistakes were staring him in the face. Aria was silent beside him, watching him carefully, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had done what was necessary. He had passed the test. Yet, deep down, a gnawing sense of unease lingered. Why had she chosen him? Why had this immortal being, who'd guarded this ancient place for so long, brought him into this mess? He turned to Aria, his eyes narrowing. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Aria's glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe. But it was gone so quickly he wondered if he imagined it. "I've told you everything you need to know," she replied softly. "No, you haven't," Jack shot back, his voice low but firm. "You keep talking about my connection to this planet and my ancestors, but every time I press you for answers, you deflect. What's the real reason I'm here, Aria? Why me?" Aria took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. "You have to understand, Jack. I didn't choose you. The seal chose you. It recognized your bloodline, your potential." Jack stepped back, his frustration mounting. "You didn't choose me," he repeated. "Then why did you bring me here? Why didn't you just find someone else? There must be hundreds of others who could have done this." A flicker of something darker crossed Aria's face, and she turned away from him, looking down at the floor of the cavern. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant for you to be involved. Jack's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean by that? Aria's shoulders tensed, and she remained silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice heavy with regret. Your people didn't abandon this world by choice. They didn't forget who they were willingly. They were forced into hiding. The entity, the one that threatened the Alliance, the one that destroyed everything, was not just a mindless force. It was controlled. Jack's eyes widened. Controlled. By who? Aria turned to face him again, her face pale. By one of your own. One of your ancestors. Jack blinked, trying to process the revelation. What are you talking about? My ancestors betrayed humanity. How is that possible? Not betrayed, Aria corrected, but they made a decision. They knew that the entity, the one that nearly destroyed everything, could be harnessed. They believed it could be controlled, used as a weapon to ensure humanity's dominance over the stars. But the power was too great, too corrupting. The entity was released, and the Alliance fractured. Jack's stomach twisted. The thought of his ancestors, his own bloodline, using such destructive power was hard to imagine. But it made sense, in a twisted way. Humanity had always fought for control, even when the cost was unimaginable. Could they really have thought they could control something like that? So, what happened? Jack asked, his voice trembling slightly. What did they do? Aria's face hardened. They sealed the entity here, on this planet, in the hope that it would remain contained. But they made a mistake. They thought they could lock it away forever. They thought that by erasing the past, they could protect future generations from the horrors they had unleashed. But they underestimated one thing. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. Me. Aria nodded. Yes, the seal was meant to be a prison, not just for the entity, but for the knowledge of the past. Your ancestors wiped their memories, erased their connection to this place. But the seal recognizes you because you carry their blood. The planet, the seal, it all remembers. And now, you have to make a choice. Jack stepped back, his mind reeling. A choice. What choice? Whether to follow through with the restoration, Aria said, her voice low. Whether to repair the seal and keep the entity trapped, or to let it break free. If you choose the latter, the destruction will spread across the stars, beginning with Earth. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't breathe. It felt as if the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on him. He thought he understood the situation. But now, it seemed as though everything had changed again. He wasn't just some helpless crash survivor anymore. He was standing at the crossroads of an ancient war, a war his ancestors had started. Why are you telling me this now? Jack asked, his voice sharp. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Aria's expression softened, though there was sadness in her eyes. Because I didn't want you to hate them. The truth is, the decision they made was never meant to destroy humanity. They were trying to protect you. But they couldn't foresee what would happen after they sealed the entity. Over time, the seal's power weakened, and I became its last protector. I had to wait for the right person to come along. Someone with the courage to make the right choice. I didn't want it to be you, Jack. I didn't want to involve you in this. Jack's mind raced, a storm of emotions crashing inside him. And yet, here I am. The one who has to fix everything. The one who has to choose whether the whole universe burns or if we keep pretending to live in a lie. Aria stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You are not alone in this. The decision is yours, but you don't have to make it by yourself. Jack looked at her, her eyes filled with hope, and something inside him stirred. He wanted to believe her, but he wasn't sure he could trust her or anyone anymore. You want me to trust you, Jack said slowly. After all this, after everything you've kept from me. Aria's gaze hardened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of anger in her eyes. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't tell you everything. I was bound by the seal, by its rules. But I've been here long enough to know that not all of humanity's history is tainted. Some of them fought for good, and you have the power to continue that fight." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. Was she right? Could he really make the right choice? Or would his decision lead to the same kind of destruction that had torn his ancestors apart? The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "I don't know what the right choice is, but I know one thing. I'm not running anymore. I'll face whatever comes next, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done." Arya nodded, her face softening. "That's all I can ask. Now let's get to work. We have a world to save. The true enemy." The cavern had grown quieter, the hum of the seal now almost imperceptible, but its presence was undeniable. Jack and Arya stood in front of the colossal machine, its energy pulsating softly, as if it was waiting for them to act. But Jack's mind was elsewhere, on the truth he had just learned. His ancestors, the people who had once walked among the stars, had been responsible for the catastrophe that almost wiped out the universe. And now, because of their decision to lock away the destructive force they had created, he had been dragged into this cosmic war, an unwilling player in a game that had started long before he was even born. And yet, as much as he wanted to run, as much as his instincts screamed at him to find a way out of this nightmare, something inside him held steady. His feet were planted firmly on the ground. He wasn't going anywhere. "So, what happens now?" Jack asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. He turned to Arya, desperate for some clarity, some way forward. Arya's face was unreadable, her glowing eyes distant. She stood motionless for a long moment, as if weighing every word before speaking. When she finally turned toward him, her expression hardened. "The entity you've seen in your visions, the one that destroyed everything and forced your ancestors into hiding, is not just a force of nature. It is a consciousness, an intelligence that feeds on destruction. It has been dormant for millennia, waiting. But its prison is weakening. And with your arrival, Jack, it has sensed an opportunity to escape." Jack's stomach twisted. He knew the entity was powerful. He'd felt it, the way the ground had trembled underfoot when he first set foot on this planet. The chilling presence that seemed to haunt the corners of his thoughts. But now, to hear that it wasn't some mindless force of nature, it was something intelligent, something capable of planning. It made the stakes even higher. "You said it was controlled before," Jack said, his voice steadying. "By my ancestors, right? So why didn't they just finish it off? Why didn't they destroy it for good?" Arya's gaze faltered for a moment. Her eyes briefly darted away from his, as though she were recalling something painful. "They tried," she said quietly. "But the entity was too powerful, too clever. It manipulated them, made them believe it could be controlled. They were blinded by their ambition. The entity fed on their fear, their desire for power, and it made them believe it was an ally." Jack's mind raced. "You mean it was playing them the whole time?" Arya nodded. "Yes, it fed on their need for control, twisting their perceptions until they thought they could harness its power. But when they realized what they had done, when they realized that they could never control it, they sealed it away here, on this planet, in a prison of their making." Jack clenched his fists. "So, all this time, it's just been waiting for a way out." Arya's voice became even softer, tinged with a sadness Jack hadn't expected. "Yes, and the longer the seal weakens, the more the entity gains strength. It has already begun to stir, its power reaching beyond the borders of this planet. Soon, it will be able to manipulate the very fabric of reality, corrupting everything it touches." Jack shuddered. The thought of an ancient, godlike entity breaking free and turning the universe into a twisted reflection of itself was almost too much to comprehend. "How do we stop it?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was desperate for an answer, for something that could give him hope, something that would allow him to believe that he could really make a difference. Arya turned toward him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the seal's light. The only way to stop the entity is to restore the seal, to re-establish the barrier that holds it in place. But this is not something you can do alone, Jack. The seal requires more than just your bloodline. It requires the combined will of both of us, your will and mine. Jack's brow furrowed. What do you mean? What's your role in this? Arya hesitated, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. I have guarded the seal for millennia, yes, but I am not immune to its power. I am bound to it, just as you are bound to your ancestors. The moment the seal is restored, I will lose my immortality. My connection to this place will be severed. I will age like any other being. Jack's heart sank. So, you've been immortal this whole time, just to protect this thing. And now you're telling me you'll die if we fix it. Arya nodded, her face stoic. Yes, it's the price I've paid for my role as the guardian of this world. But if we do nothing, if we allow the entity to escape, it will destroy everything. I may lose my immortality, but I will not lose my purpose. Jack's chest tightened as he processed her words. She had been stuck here, bound to this place for centuries, guarding a secret she could never escape. And now, she was asking him to help her seal it all away again, even if it meant her own end. The weight of what she was asking hit him harder than he expected. She was giving up everything, all for the chance that humanity might have a future. And yet Jack didn't even know if he was worthy of such a responsibility. Do you want to do this? Jack asked quietly, not sure if he was talking to her or to himself. Arya's gaze softened, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. It's not about what I want, Jack. It's about what's necessary. You may not feel ready, but you have a choice. We both do. Jack took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had never been someone who made grand decisions, someone who stood up for the greater good. He was a pilot, a survivor, nothing more. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the world, the universe, wasn't waiting for him to be ready. It was already on the edge of collapse. And if he didn't act, if they didn't act, then everything would fall into chaos. I'll do it, Jack said, his voice steady, but with a conviction that surprised even him. I'll help you. I'll help us both. Arya's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to say those words. Then she nodded. Then we must begin. She led him to the heart of the seal, where a central chamber glowed with an energy so powerful, it seemed to hum in the very core of Jack's being. He could feel it now, the pull of destiny, the weight of a decision that would determine the future of everything. The entity's power loomed, just beyond the horizon, and Jack knew that the final battle was coming. There was no turning back. They had made their choice. The entity would either stay trapped forever, or it would escape, and nothing would ever be the same again. The time had come to face the true enemy. The final stand. The chamber surrounding the seal was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. It pulsed with energy, an ethereal glow emanating from every surface. The air itself felt alive, vibrating with the force that bound the entity. Jack could hear the distant echo of whispers, as if the very walls were trying to communicate with him, pleading, warning, or maybe something else entirely. It was hard to tell. The sensation was overwhelming. Arya stood at the center of the chamber, her face a mask of calm resolve. The light from the seal illuminated her figure, casting long shadows on the walls, and for a moment, she seemed almost otherworldly. She was not just an immortal alien. She was the last guardian, the final line of defense against an ancient evil. And now, she was asking Jack to take the final step. Jack's heart raced in his chest. He had never been one for grand ideals or heroic deeds. He was just a guy, a pilot, someone who had always avoided responsibility. But now, standing here, he knew there was no escape. This was it. The fate of everything hung in the balance. Are you ready? Arya's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a sense of urgency, even desperation. Jack glanced around the chamber, his mind racing. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said, his voice strained. "But I know one thing. I can't let it escape. I can't let everything go to hell because of my fear." Aria's gaze softened, just for a moment, before it hardened again. "Good. You don't need to be ready, Jack. You just need to act." With those words, she stepped forward, her hands resting gently on the seal. The energy around them intensified, the light blinding for a moment. Jack's body tensed as the power surged through the room, and he felt it, deep inside him, a connection forming between himself and the seal. The bloodline he carried, the legacy of his ancestors, flowed into the machine. He could feel it, pulsing like a second heartbeat, drawing on his very essence. For a fleeting moment, Jack thought he could hear the entity, or maybe it was just his imagination, the voice that echoed from the depths of his mind. It was deep, guttural, and full of malice. "You cannot stop me, human," the voice rumbled, echoing through the cavern. "You are nothing compared to the power I wield. Your ancestors thought they could control me. They were wrong. I will break free, and I will destroy everything you love." Jack gritted his teeth. The voice was powerful, but he had no intention of giving in. He had come too far, sacrificed too much. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the future of every living being, every world, every possibility. He reached out, placing his hand on the surface of the seal. The instant his fingers made contact, a rush of energy surged through him, flooding his senses. His mind was assaulted by images, visions of destruction, of the entity breaking free, spreading like a disease across the stars. He saw entire planets consumed by darkness, their inhabitants turned to dust, their memories erased. But then, something else, a glimmer of hope, a future where the light prevailed. But it wasn't just a vision, it was a choice. "Jack," Aria's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone sharp. "Focus. The seal needs your will. You must believe it can work. You have to trust that it can be contained." Jack clenched his jaw. "I know," he said through gritted teeth. His hand burned with the energy surging through the seal, but he forced himself to stay grounded. The fear that gripped him, the uncertainty, it all melted away in that moment. He knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, Jack closed his eyes and focused, reaching deep into himself, into the legacy that connected him to this ancient power. His ancestors had sealed the entity away, and now it was his turn to finish the job. He would not fail. Not now. The chamber around him seemed to vibrate, the very walls shaking with the force of the power he was tapping into. He could feel the entity trying to claw its way through the seal, its voice growing louder, more frantic. "You cannot win," it howled. "I will consume you all." But Jack stood firm. His connection to the seal strengthened, the power coursing through him like wildfire. And then, with a final surge of energy, he pushed. The seal glowed brighter than ever before, the light blinding. For a moment, Jack thought he might be torn apart by the force of it. But then the light stabilized, and the energy began to calm. The whispers faded, the voice of the entity growing distant. Jack felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, and the power within him subsided. He opened his eyes to find Aria standing next to him, watching him with a look of quiet approval. "You did it," she said softly. Jack collapsed to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The weight of what he had just done, of what he had just chosen, felt like 1,000 tons pressing down on him. But it was done. The entity was sealed away once more. The universe was safe. For now. But as Jack sat there, catching his breath, something didn't feel right. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He turned to Aria, his voice hoarse. "Is it really over?" he asked, his words tinged with doubt. Aria's face was unreadable. "For now," she said quietly. "But the entity's influence will linger. Its power may be sealed, but its corruption is not so easily erased. You've done what was needed, Jack. But the war is far from over. Jack stood slowly, his body aching, but his resolve firm. What now? Arya stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Now we return to the world we've saved. But we must be vigilant. We must ensure the seal remains intact, that nothing awakens it again. Jack nodded, looking up at the cavern's ceiling, where a single shaft of light pierced the darkness. It was the light of a new dawn, a dawn born from his choice, from his sacrifice. He had faced the entity, and in doing so, he had changed everything. Not just for himself, but for the future of the universe. The battle had been won, but the fight for peace, for balance, had just begun. Jack wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't be running from it. Not anymore.